James had everything a person could wish for. A thriving business, a sprawling mansion just outside the city, and enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. But despite all the wealth and luxury, he felt a growing unease in his gut. Vanessa, his beautiful wife, had become distant over the last few months. The woman who once couldn't wait to share every detail of her day now seemed lost in her thoughts, her eyes glazing over during conversations, and her phone never left her side. First, James tried to brush it off. He told himself that Vanessa was just going through a phase, that the stress of managing her own interior design firm was taking its toll. But as the weeks passed, his doubts grew stronger. She was coming home later and later, offering vague excuses about work meetings and last-minute client calls. Sometimes, she'd leave without saying where she was going, only to return hours later, her mood swinging between irritation and exhaustion. James couldn't help but wonder if there was something more behind her behavior. One night, while lying in bed next to her, staring at the ceiling, he made up his mind. He needed answers. The next morning, he discreetly reached out to a private investigator, someone who could find out the truth without stirring up too much trouble. Marcus was the detective's name, a no-nonsense guy in his late 40s, with a face that had seen more than its fair share of life's rough edges. He didn't ask James many questions, just took the details and promised to be in touch soon. James felt a strange mix of relief and guilt after that meeting. He wasn't proud of snooping around behind Vanessa's back, but he had to know what was going on. Ignorance was no longer an option. Marcus began tailing Vanessa almost immediately. He was good at blending in, just another face in the crowd, unnoticed and unremarkable. First, nothing seemed amiss. Vanessa's days were filled with the usual: meetings with clients, site visits for her design projects, and the occasional lunch with friends. It was all perfectly normal, at least on the surface. But Marcus had been doing this long enough to know that the most seemingly innocent routines often hid the darkest secrets. Then one day, Marcus noticed something odd. Every Wednesday afternoon, like clockwork, Vanessa would slip away to a quaint little cafe on the other side of town. It was one of those places that seemed stuck in time, with its mismatched furniture, old-fashioned decor, and a quiet atmosphere that encouraged patrons to linger. Vanessa always arrived at the same time, ordered the same cup of green tea, and sat at the same table by the window. She'd stay there for hours, staring out the window or writing in a small leather-bound notebook she kept in her purse. Marcus watched her from a distance, trying to figure out what was so special about this place. And then, he noticed something else. At precisely 2:15 p.m. every Wednesday, a man would enter the cafe. He was in his mid-30s, casually dressed in a black jacket and jeans, with a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He'd sit down at a table across from Vanessa, not directly with her, but close enough to catch her eye. The two never exchanged a word. They never acknowledged each other. Yet there was something unspoken between them, a tension that Marcus couldn't quite put his finger on. It was as if they were both waiting for something to happen, a silent understanding that went beyond mere coincidence. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a casual meeting spot or a random encounter. There was something deliberate, almost ritualistic, about these weekly visits. As the weeks went by, Marcus kept digging. He checked the cafe's security footage and followed the man after he left. It turned out he wasn't exactly who he appeared to be. His name was Ryan, a man with a past as checkered as they come. He had a history of con jobs and scams, most of which involved charming his way into the lives of wealthy women. But what was his connection to Vanessa? And why was she meeting with him, even if only from a distance? Marcus reported his findings to James, who was stunned. He couldn't believe that his Vanessa, was involved with someone like Ryan, the woman he had fallen in love with, the one who had always been so honest and open, was now hiding something so significant. But what was it? Was she being blackmailed? Was she in some kind of trouble? Or worse, was she willingly involved with this man? James felt like his world was crumbling. The more he thought about it, the more the pieces didn't add up. Vanessa had never given him any reason to doubt her before. She had always been loyal, supportive, and loving. But now, he couldn't shake the image of her sitting in that cafe, waiting for a man with a shady past. He decided that he needed to confront her, but he had to be smart about it. Rushing in with accusations would only make things worse. That Friday evening, James waited for Vanessa to come home. She arrived later than usual, looking tired and distracted. He offered her a glass of wine, hoping to ease into the conversation. As they sat in the living room, the tension between them was palpable. Finally, James broke the silence. "Vanessa, we need to talk," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with confusion and a hint of fear. "What is it, James? What's going on?" He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "I know you've been meeting someone at that cafe. A man. His name is Ryan. I just want to understand what's happening." Vanessa's face went pale. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words, her hands trembling slightly as she set down her wine glass. "James, it's not what you think," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. He wanted to believe her, but the doubt was too strong. "Then tell me, Vanessa, what's going on?" Vanessa sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I didn't want you to find out like this. Ryan, he's my half-brother." James blinked, taken aback. "Your half-brother? You never mentioned—" "I didn't know about him until a few months ago," she interrupted, her eyes welling up with tears. "My father had an affair before I was born. Ryan was the result. He reached out to me and I didn't know how to tell you. I've been trying to get to know him, figure out what kind of person he is, before bringing him into our lives. I was scared, James. Scared of how you'd react. Scared of what it meant for us." James sat there, processing everything. The anger, the suspicion, the fear. It all melted away, replaced by a wave of guilt. He had jumped to conclusions, hired a detective, and doubted the woman he loved without giving her a chance to explain. Vanessa was crying now, her hands covering her face. "I'm sorry, James," she sobbed. "I should have told you. I just didn't want to hurt you." He moved closer, wrapping his arms around her, holding her tightly. "I'm sorry too, Vanessa. I let my fears get the best of me. We should have talked about this. We'll get through it together, okay?" Vanessa nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. For a long time, they sat there in silence, holding on to each other, trying to mend the invisible cracks that had formed between them. It wasn't going to be easy, but they knew they had to face this new challenge as a team, just like they had faced everything else in their lives. In the days that followed, James and Vanessa met with Ryan together. It was awkward at first, but over time, they began to build a tentative relationship. James kept Marcus in the loop, thanking him for his work, but also explaining that there was no longer a need for his services. He had found the truth, and while it wasn't what he had expected, it was something he could live with, because at the end of the day, trust and communication were what mattered most. And James was determined to never let fear drive a wedge between him and Vanessa again.